Good morning, everybody. Pat Flynn here with Philosophy for the People. I'm going to talk apologetics today. I want to recommend to you my favorite apologetics book. This really isn't an apologetics channel, as many of you know. I am, of course, somebody who was through a long philosophical journey, brought from a naturalism to a theism to a Catholicism. I'm Catholic. And I like to focus mostly on philosophy and philosophical issues that interest me. And I actually don't like a lot of apologetics books. Apologetics books, are books that attempt to give a defense of some position. And obviously, a book in Christian apologetics is attempting to give a defense of Christianity. Maybe it's a defense of mere Christianity, or it's a defense of Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, or what have you. Anyway, the reason I don't like a lot of apologetics books is they're very superficial. I think they're very philosophically slim. That's just the issue with sort of popular level books, often in general. But every once in a while, you come across a pretty good one. And I want to share with you my favorite book that I've read in apologetics. Now, some books kind of blur the line a little bit, and I'll reveal it to you in a second. By the way, good morning, everybody. Hey, all right, I can't believe it. Blake, can't believe it, man. I have to spoil it. It's exactly the book I'm going to recommend. So Blake in the comments spoiled it. My favorite apologetics book is Taking Pascal's Wager by Dr. Michael Rota. It's crazy, dude. It's crazy. All right, well, at least I'm not the only one. I'll talk about it more in a minute. Blake, I feel like you should win a sticker or a prize or something. I don't know. Hey, how about, check this out, guys, real quick. Talk about books, right? You got to read the damn book. Finally got the t-shirts made. Look at, there it is. Let me stand up. What do you guys think of that? It's a little design we're mocking up for Philosophy for the People. Jim and I always like to say, read the damn book. Can't just stop at the podcast. Got to read the damn book. Well, here's a book you can read. It's a wonderful apologetics book. Now, why do I love this one? Well, let me count the reasons, right? And look, even if you're not Christian, I think you should read this because there's a lot of really great stuff in here. And of course, hey, who knows? Maybe it'll have an effect, right? Because it's all about trying to give the reasons and evidence for why Dr. Rota thinks Christianity is true. Now, who's Dr. Michael Rota? He's a professional philosopher. He's done a lot of really good work, especially professional work on Pascal's wager. Many of you are familiar with Pascal's wager. He's really refined that argument, and he's refined it against what he considers, of course, the most important objections to that argument. And you can read, his research and publications there. I think he's probably the best contemporary defender of Pascal's wager on the scene today. So the book isn't just on Pascal's wager. It's not just a book on Pascal's wager. That's part of the book. But the reason I really like this book is he's going to introduce you to a lot of really important debates in philosophy and a lot of different aspects of natural theology, which is the stuff that I'm, primarily interested in. And he's very good. He's very honest, and he hits that right balance of making things accessible, but also making sure that he addresses the really important objections, right? He's not, if you're familiar with the literature on a lot of this stuff, he's being really fair. And that's what I always look for, as somebody who's kind of coming in usually with a pretty decent understanding of where the debate is in the literature. Is this popularizer? Is this apologist? Are they treating the issues fairly? Are they representing, the strongest objections? Are they representing their opponents fair? Obviously, you can't treat everything, right? So even I'm writing my book right now, which will be, it's with Sophia, so it will be a popular level book. And so my challenge is, again, to try and make things as accessible as I can, but to make sure that I am engaging with the strongest challenges and fairly representing both sides of the debate. I think Dr. Michael Rota does great on that. So let me tell you what I really appreciate this book. It's a really interesting approach to Pascal's wager, because he's blending Pascal's wager with many different considerations that he thinks point toward not just a theistic worldview, but Christianity. And he thinks that these considerations should get you to a sort of high enough credence level that once you're there, that's when Pascal's wager kicks in. He doesn't think that Pascal's wager can just do all the work. He thinks it needs to be served up alongside other arguments and evidence. And then once those arguments and evidence get you to a certain, credence level, confidence in the position he's arguing for, that's when he thinks Pascal's wager kicks in. So, maybe he thinks you got to get to like you're 50-50 between specifically Christianity and naturalism or something like that. Right? So he restricts, he restricts the application of Pascal's wager. And in doing that, he thinks that's a way to either get around some objections or, maybe those certain objections are successful and they just demand a restricted form of Pascal's wager, however you want to think about it, right? Okay, so first off, Dr. Rota's got a great article. I think he won an award for it on causal reasoning and causal explanations. He does a nice job in part 2 of talking about causal explanations. What is a causal explanation? He has a really great explanation for that. He has a really great explanation of what causal explanations are and setting up what might be called a stage 1 of the contingency argument. So for those of you who are not familiar, we've talked about contingency arguments before. In a lot of the contemporary conversation, contingency arguments are broken up into 2 stages. By the way, we're live, so if you guys have any questions or just want to jam around, do some Q&A here, I got a little bit of time. I was up here doing a different podcast for my fitness show, and then I was like, you know what? Let me hop on Philosophy for People and say hello real quick. Hi. So contingency arguments, 2 stages. Usually the first stage goes, something like this. Hey, there are contingent things that they exist. They don't have to exist. Let's develop a causal principle. Let's slap that principle down on those contingent things and argue for a necessary thing, right? So moving from the contingent to the necessary is kind of what's considered a stage 1 of the contingency argument. Can we argue for at least one necessary being from the data of contingency, right? And he gives you a very nice formulation of that in this book. So I think I think he does a very nice, it's just nice, right? He does a nice job of that. But then there's stage 2 in contingency arguments. And that's where, well, what can we know about this necessary thing? Is there one? Are there 10? Are there 10,000? Why should we think that this thing is God? And there's a lot of debate about that. But what Michael Rota does is he kind of stops the contingency argument or cosmological reasoning there. And instead, he shifts to the fine-tuning argument. So it's just kind of like interesting apologetic blend, right? Where he takes a part of cosmological arguments and then blends it with fine-tuning. And then he thinks, well, the arguments from fine-tuning should cause us to think that whatever this sort of necessary foundation is one and supremely intelligent and stuff like that. And his presentation of the fine-tuning, I've read a lot of literature on fine-tuning, is really good. And he's got a follow-up article that is one of the best on the fine-tuning issue. And he deals with some of the best objections, including objections concerning, like the normalizability objection and issues concerning probability, making probability judgments and stuff like that. Some of the trickiest objections, I think, Rota's got really good ways of thinking about those types of objections. But in this book, again, I think he does a really fine and fair job of presenting and defending the fine-tuning argument. Definitely on the popular level, it's probably the best I've seen before you hop into the academic literature on the matter. But what's really cool, one nice thing in this book is he's got an entire chapter called A Primer on Probability, where he gives you this wonderful just introduction to epistemic probability. And it's a really great, useful chapter. So if you just want a primer on probability, I think this is like, if I were teaching a course, I would just use that chapter on that, because I think he just did such a good job. And then, of course, he talks about the multiverse and how does that factor in as an objection to fine tuning and stuff like that. But anyways, I just thought it was kind of like a neat thing where he kind of took a piece of one argument and took a piece and then took another argument and kind of, blended them together to make his apologetic case for theism. Then he's got a section on divine hiddenness and evil. And what's really cool about this, and this excited me about his book, is he really attempted to synthesize 2 of my favorite thinkers on the issue of the problem of evil and divine hiddenness. Now, I had a conversation not too long ago about 8 or so responses to the problem of evil. And there were 2 people in there that I mentioned I particularly particularly have benefited from their line of thinking on this. And those two people are Eleanor Stump and Peter von Inwagen. I think that they engage with this issue very seriously, very thoughtfully, and very effectively. Rhoda thinks that you can kind of marry their approaches. And I think he's right about that. So I think his chapter here on the problem of evil and divine hiddenness is very good. Again, is really about as good as it gets on popular level apologetics books. He then, and I see Sean says, are there any good apologetics books on the resurrection? If you haven't read this one, Sean, I would at least start here. He then gives a very good survey of the historical evidence for Christianity and the resurrection. Again, fairly treats, the most important and relevant objections. So I think this would be a good starting point for that. Of course, there's much more substantial work on that, but I think Rhoda's presentation here is a very good one. Talks about miracles, talks about myths, and then a really cool part about this book that was very touching to me. I'm not a big touchy-feely guy, but I liked it. Is he gives certain chapters that just have a certain existential resonance. He talks about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and just the lives of certain people and the incredible self-donating love that they exhibited, through their commitment to Christianity. And he thinks that adds some evidential weight to the scale. Not decisive by itself, but it was nice to have that. It's not, the intellectual side is important, but that practical, lived side, I think is worth mentioning as well. And then, of course, he does develop Pascal's wager in really wonderful detail, addresses the most important objections against Pascal's wager, and then ultimately, end of the day, and he qualifies it, right? He says, look, like, Pascal's wager isn't about just believing something, right? At least he doesn't think so. At least he doesn't formulate it that way. He says that given all the evidence that we've just seen, and given Pascal's wager, the rational thing to do is to then begin a life of religious seeking, right? You can't just like automatically flip the switch and be like, oh, I believe now. He gets that, right? But the rational thing to do is that, he thinks after you consider all these arguments and all this evidence and you understand Pascal's wager, the rational thing to do at that point is to begin a life of religious seeking, right? What does that mean? Well, you can start praying. You could even start praying as an agnostic, right? God, if there is a God, save my soul if I have a soul. Start getting involved in religious communities, start reading scripture, going to Bible studies, sitting in at mass, whatever, right? But you start to shift your disposition, your trajectory, your way of life, that you should begin a life of religious seeking, get involved in religious communities, start doing these religious things, not inauthentically. That's why he says you can approach this totally as an agnostic. And I think that's good, because one of the issues people have with Pascal's wager is the right one. Is like, I can't just like flip my belief state. Now there's a lot of debate about that, whether you have how much control you have over your beliefs and whatnot. Rhoda dodges a lot of that by just positioning it as it's rational to begin a life of religious seeking. So that's it, my friends. I'm still astonished that our friend Blake here guessed it right off the bat. I thought it was going to have a surprise. It was going to keep you all in suspense. But a lot of apologetics books are pretty garbage. Sorry to say, they just are. But a lot of pop level books are kind of like that on all sides, aren't they? But this one's a very strong exception, written by a professional philosopher, a very thoughtful man. I believe that Rhoda might be a convert himself. Don't totally quote me on that. He has been on my show, my previous podcast, at least 2 times. Really beautiful man, very beautiful family. We were able to host them for dinner a couple of years, and doing really good work on a lot of different areas in philosophy. So really great thinker, really great thinker. And if there's one book that I kind of recommend generally to people who's, spare me from the really dense philosophy, but don't give me any baby stuff either. Here it is, Taking Pascal's Wager. Let's see the t-shirt. Read the damn book. Read the damn book. Read the whole thing. You will. You'll really enjoy it. It's really well written, too. He's got a great writing style. So how are all of you guys doing? Anybody got anything we want to talk about? Anything we want to discuss? I got a few minutes here. I'm going to wrap it up. Then I got to get back to work. What are you guys reading? I would love to hear, either right now on the stream or afterwards, just what books you guys are currently tucking into. So my wife says, I'm going to tuck into a book. I'm going to tuck into a book. I got a whole heap of them right over here, but I don't know if there's any I want to immediately recommend. Actually, I just recommended this real quick on my other podcast. I got too many podcasts. I got to cut back on the number of podcasts I do. I've recommended this before, but I'll give it to you guys again real quick. This has nothing to do with apologetics, but if you haven't read Adler's How to Read a Book, just because it's sitting right here, I want to point it out. And the key to this is after you read this book, which is on how to really engage with a book that's currently above you and go from a state of understanding less to understanding more, just go right to Appendix A. Go right to Appendix A. He's got his great books list. So if you're just looking for a good, robust philosophical education, boy, you can't go wrong with this. Read this book so you know how to read a book. And then just go right there. Then you start with Homer, go to the Old Testament, right on through Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, Euclid. And he's going to bring you right on up to pretty much modern contemporary times. Look at look, you got your work cut out for you if you follow this, right? And I'll be honest, I haven't read all this stuff. Read a lot of it. Haven't read all of it. I haven't read Jane Austen, for example. Shame on me. I have not read Jane Austen. My wife has. I think she's read both of those. I have not. So I gotta get caught up there. Alfred North Whitehead, yeah, very important. Very important. Mark Twain, definitely have read my Mark Twain. So, it's not all just the heavy-hitting philosophers in here. He's just got really just important contributors in general to culture and to thought. Twain was hugely important. A lot of people don't know this, but Twain actually had a big engagement with the cult of Christian Science at the time. Remember that? Really interesting series of essays against them. Freud. Just wanted to share this with you. Bertrand Russell, of course, very important. Sartre, Jacques Maritain. Yeah, he's got a good amount of Maritain in here. Art and Scholasticism, Degrees of Knowledge, The Rights of Man and Natural Law, True Humanism. If I were to say, if you're going to start with anything from Maritain, The Rights of Man and Natural Law is a really good one. Maritain. Degrees of Knowledge is pretty dense, pretty technical work of epistemology. It's really important, I think. But The Rights of Man and Natural Law, if you're going to start with Maritain, probably that one. Anyways, I'm rambling. Hope you guys are all having a great week. Hope you like these recommendations. Hey, do me a favor. If you like what we're doing here at Philosophy for the People, you can help us out in a couple of ways. First, if you want these T-shirts, let me know. I can make them available. This was the test. This was the test run. Let me show it one more time. Read the damn book. And they feel great. Really good quality. Very soft. Feels great. But anyways, invite your friends to this channel, please. Share our content. Subscribe. Make sure you comment. I understand that the algorithm likes that sort of thing. So after the streams or once I put up a video, share your thoughts. I really do try to read as much of the comments that come in as possible and, engage as much as possible. Remember, I have many different channels and stuff, so it's a lot to keep up with, but I really do care about what you guys have to contribute, whether you agree, whether you disagree. I want this to always be an ongoing conversation, so it helps. It helps if you share. It helps if you engage. It helps if you like. It helps if you comment. So please do that. A lot of stuff going on over at the Substack. A lot of stuff coming up next week. I think I got two coming next week. One with Gavin Kerr. What's the other one? I forget. But we'll probably see you before then with Dr. J maybe on Friday. So you guys have a good morning, and we'll see you in the next video.